You know, there's an old saying that men love to tell stories. Men talk about the weather, and women talk about men talking about the weather. Well, if men aren't talking about the weather, they're talking about sports. And one of the things that we love about talking about sports history is that so often when you got a group of guys that are sitting down talking about a great moment or great team or great player in sports history, I can offer a portion of the story. Someone else can offer a different portion of that story, and yet someone else can offer another portion of that said story. That is what we love about sports history. And that's why this week when I received the article from Brad Walsh, our resident historian for the Touchdown Club of Atlanta, I was absolutely giddy. And yes, I mean to use the word giddy when I saw the subject of this week's Ever Wonder portion of the program, because it was about one of the great rivalries in Georgia high school football history. You can't help, as a 22-year veteran, as I am of Georgia high school football broadcasting, you can't help but know a good deal about the history in this state. It's connected. There's no way around not learning about the history of Georgia high school football in this state if you're going to be a broadcaster. And so most of us play-by-play guys, we know about the history of Woodward Academy versus Marist in the late 70s and early 80s. These two programs met, I think, 9 times over a 5-year stretch, and 3 times the two programs went on to reach the state championship game, or actually more precisely 4 times, but we'll get into that in just a moment. A byproduct of that rivalry, one of the great in this state's history in such a short time span, the byproduct was also one of the great traditions in this state's history. Woodward Academy, remember, is a very old school. Started as the Georgia Military Academy in 1900. Changed their name to Woodward in 66 when they dropped the military emphasis. Throughout its 100 year of football history, they've played just about anybody and everybody they could play across the region, across the state, of course. But the only really constant rival throughout that time has been Marist, whom they first played in 1922. Starting in 1976, as I mentioned, it was the beginning of this incredibly intense rivalry between two teams that in any given year were arguably the best teams in their state, in their respective classifications. In 1976, the two teams, region rivals at this point, met early in the regular season. That would be the storyline from 76 through 79. Region rivals, meeting early in the season and meeting late in the season. I'll get to it in a second. So in week 2, the two teams meet, and Marist comes away with a 3-point victory. But a 1-point victory to Woodward happened in the region final. That would knock Marist out of the state playoffs and propel Woodward onto the state championship game, which they would go on to lose, by the way, to Avondale High School. 1976, the rivalry amps up a little bit. Woodward would sweep Marist in the regular season and to secure the region title, and again, end Marist's season. Then it really becomes a rivalry, because in 1978, Marist flipped the script and swept Woodward, beat them in the regular season early, and beat them in the region final. 1979 now, Woodward would beat Marist in week 2, but Marist would win 17-7 in the region final, ending Woodward's season. Marist would go to the state championship game, where they would lose, a state championship game that they're still talking about, by the way. They would lose to Redan High School by just 3 points. That's a whole nother subject for the All Sports Report and the Ever Wonder portion of the program, that great championship game between Redan and Marist in 1979. But anyway, then came 1980. The biggest year in question, the biggest year of the rivalry. By this time, the school, the players, the fans, the student body, obviously the administration, the city, really, and the state knew about the rivalry between Marist and Woodward Academy. Woodward would enter their regular season matchup ranked number 3 in the state. That was their only scheduled meeting. The two teams were no longer in the region. They were just playing each other in a regular season early matchup because they were rivals. Marist would come out with the 20-14 upset victory with a last-second touchdown against the number 3 team in the state. And Woodward was absolutely stunned because Marist was, quite honestly, supposed to be down a little bit that year. That win would propel Marist on for the rest of that 1980 season. But it left a bitter, bitter taste in the mouth of the Woodward Academy program, not just because of the loss, but what happened later on after the ball game during the week. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the sports section, of course, covered that ball game because it was one of the bigger ball games across the state, if not the biggest game across the state that weekend. And senior linebacker and fullback Jeff Ogletree was interviewed regarding the ball game and quoted in the article as saying, "I felt after the first play of the game like we were going to win." Quite a bold statement. He then went on to say, "We just seemed to want it more than they did." We just seemed to want it more than they did. Those last 9 words punched Coach Hickson and his Woodward Academy team in the gut. Really, really hit him where it hurt, because obviously that's a shot at your pride is really what that is. What it did for Woodward, not only did that win propel Marist on to a tremendous successful season, but it also really lit a fire under Woodward's tush and pushed them all the way to the state championship game. So Woodward gets to that state title game. They get onto the sidelines, they look across the field, and who do they see? But Marist. That's right, you can't write this script. Woodward Academy and Marist met each other in 1980 for the state championship. So Coach Hickson knew that he wanted to do something to try to fire up his Woodward club. So he went out, found an old wooden plank, pulled out his pocket knife, and he took that 9-word quote from Ogletree, "We just seemed to want it more than they did," and he carved it into that wooden plank. He then bore holes in the plank, took a little rope or a heavy string, put it through there, and put it around his neck, and Coach Hickson wore the plank around his neck for the state championship game. Well, Marist jumped out to a 10-0 lead halfway through that first half, but Woodward would come back with 14 unanswered points and then come up with a goal line stand late in the ball game, where some of the student body and players were loosely quoted as saying, "We just wanted it more. We just wanted it more." Today, that wooden plank still hangs as Woodward Academy players come out onto the field as a moment of motivation. They did that at the beginning of the 81 season, promptly went out to the locker room or the field house or wherever they have it hanging and put it right out there. And again, it still hangs on the locker room above the exit to this very day. Coming up next, in the What's Next portion of our program, we take an early look at the 2015 GHSA Executive Committee's spring meetings.